Hello again from Mrs. Rania Al-Safadi, English for Palestine, 10th grade. Today, we are going to continue with Around the World in 80 Days, Unit 5, Episode 5. Where did they go after Singapore? Did they find Aunt and Uncle? Open your books, page 72. Mr. Fogg misses the boat. Don't forget to use HP Reveal application. Let's have fun.
Passepartout headed quickly to the port to reserve 3 cabins on the Carnatic. He was delighted that Odo was going to continue the journey with them. When he found Fix walking up and down the docks, he was not surprised. Fix seemed very worried. The detective had good reason to be upset. The warrant for Mr. Fogg's arrest had not arrived yet. It would not reach Hong Kong for 2 more days. Hong Kong was the last English territory on Mr. Fogg's route, and if Fix did not arrest him here, Fogg would escape.
"Well, Monsieur Fix,"
said Passepartout as he caught up to the detective.
"have you decided to go with us as far as America?"
"Yes,"
returned Fix through clenched teeth.
"Good!"
exclaimed Passepartout, laughing.
"I knew you could not separate yourself from us. Come and purchase your ticket."
Fix and Passepartout entered the steamer office and reserved 4 cabins. As the clerk handed them the tickets, he said that the repairs were complete on the Carnatic. The steamer would be ready to leave that evening, not the next morning, as had been announced.
"That will suit my master all the better,"
said Passepartout.
"I will go and let him know."
Fix decided to make a bold move. It was time to tell Passepartout the truth about his master. He invited Passepartout to go to a tavern on the quay.
"I really should inform my master of the steamer's change in schedule,"
said Passepartout.
"We'll just have a quick drink,"
Fix promised.
"I want to tell you something."
"Well, maybe just a quick one,"
Passepartout said with a smile. On entering the tavern,
"You've guessed who I am?"
"Of course,"
said Passepartout, smiling.
"Then I'm going to tell you everything."
Fix began.
"But I know everything already.
Said Passepartout.
Those gentlemen have put themselves to a useless expense."
"Useless?"
Said Fix with surprise.
"It's clear that you don't know how large the sum is."
"Of course I do.
Said Passepartout.
£20,000.
55,000.
Said Fix.
"What?"
Cried Passepartout.
£55,000.
Said Fix.
"Now, if you help me, I'll share my reward with you."
"Help you?"
Cried Passepartout, his eyes wide open.
"Yes, help me keep Mr. Fogg here for 2 or 3 days."
Said Fix.
"It's a conspiracy, then. And it is organized by the gentlemen of the Reform Club."
Passepartout was outraged.
"Mr. Fix, my master is an honorable man. He is trying to win the wager fairly, and you are trying to postpone him. Shame on you."
The detective passed his hand across his forehead. He would have to break the news delicately.
"Listen to me,"
said Fix.
"I am a police detective, sent here by the London office. Mr. Fogg's wager is only a pretext for leaving the country. On September 28th, a sum of £55,000 was stolen from the Bank of England. Phileas Fogg is the bank robber."
"Nonsense!"
Yelled Passepartout, slamming his fist on the table.
"Would you like to be arrested as his partner?"
Asked Fix abruptly.
"No!"
Said Passepartout.
"I advise you to help me detain him, or you risk just such an arrest."
Said Fix.
"I refuse,"
said Passepartout. He held his head between his hands. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Passepartout at the opium house, Mr. Fogg was escorting Aouda around the shops of Hong Kong. A lady, as Mr. Fogg was well aware, could not be expected to travel with only a carpet-bag. In the evening they returned to the hotel for an elegant dinner. At bedtime, Passepartout still had not returned. If Phileas Fogg could have been astonished by anything, this might have done it. But, thinking that the Carnatic was not departing until the morning, he was not concerned. The next morning, Mr. Fogg and Aouda prepared their bags and arrived at the quay to learn that the Carnatic had sailed the evening before. Upon hearing the news, Mr. Fogg's comment to Aouda was simply,
"It is an accident, madam. Nothing more."
Detective Fix had been watching Mr. Fogg and Aouda since their arrival at the quay. He approached Mr. Fogg innocently and asked,
"Were you not, like me, sir, a passenger on the Rangoon?" "I was,"
replied Mr. Fogg.
"but we have not been introduced." "Pardon me,"
said Fix.
"I thought I would find your servant here."
"Do you know where he is, sir?" asked Aouda anxiously.
"What?
Responded Fix, pretending to be surprised.
He's not with you?"
"No," said Aouda. "We have not seen him since yesterday. Could he have boarded the Carnatic without us?"
"Did you intend on sailing on the Carnatic as well?"
asked Fix.
"I'm very disappointed, but I've missed it also. Apparently there won't be another steamer for a week." "But there are other vessels in the harbor besides the Carnatic,"
replied Mr. Fogg with confidence. He held out his arm to Aouda and they walked off. Fix grew alarmed. He had not expected Fogg to be so determined. For 3 hours, Fix watched Mr. Fogg and Aouda wander the docks looking for a ship. He began to hope again. Then a sailor approached Mr. Fogg.
Is your honor looking for a boat?
He asked.
"Do you have a boat ready to sail?"
asked Mr. Fogg.
Yes, your honor.
Replied the sailor.
The best in the harbor.
"Will you agree to take me to Yokohama?"
asked Mr. Fogg.
Is your honor joking?
Said the sailor.
It is impossible.
"I have missed the Carnatic, and I must get to Yokohama by November 14th.
Said Fogg.
I offer you £100 per day and an additional £200 if I reach Yokohama in time."
Are you in earnest?
Asked the sailor.
"Very much so."
Said Mr. Fogg. The sailor walked away a little distance and gazed out to sea. He was struggling between the temptation of such a large sum and the danger of traveling so far. Fix watched in suspense. Mr. Fogg turned to Aouda and asked her,
"You would not be afraid, would you, madam?"
"Not with you, Mr. Fogg," she answered.
"Well, sailor?"
Said Mr. Fogg.
Your honor, I could not risk myself, my men, or my little boat on such a long voyage at this time of year. Besides, we would not reach Yokohama in time.
Answered the sailor. Fix breathed more freely.
But,
added the sailor,
it might be arranged another way.
Fix held his breath.
"How?"
Asked Mr. Fogg.
By going to Shanghai.
Said the sailor.
"Sir, I must take the American steamer at Yokohama, not at Shanghai."
Said Mr. Fogg.
It isn't necessary to go as far as Yokohama.
Said the sailor.
The San Francisco steamer does not start from Yokohama. It begins at Shanghai.
"You're sure of that?"
Asked Mr. Fogg.
Perfectly.
Replied the sailor.
"And when does the boat leave Shanghai?"
Asked Fogg.
On November 11th at 7 in the evening.
Said the sailor.
We have 4 days before us.
"And when can we leave?"
Asked Mr. Fogg.
In an hour.
The sailor replied.
"It is a deal. Are you the master of the boat?"
Asked Fogg.
Yes.
Replied the sailor.
My name is John Bunsby, captain of the Tankadere.
The two men sealed their deal, and Mr. Fogg gave John Bunsby a sum of money in advance. "But poor Passepartout," urged Aouda. "We can't leave him behind."
"I will do all I can to find him,"
replied Mr. Fogg. Before heading out in search of Passepartout, Mr. Fogg offered to let Mr. Fix join them as a passenger on the Tankadere. Mr. Fix could do nothing but accept. In a nervous state, Fix boarded the Tankadere while Mr. Fogg and Aouda went to the local police station. Phileas Fogg left Passepartout's description with the police. He also left a sum of money to be spent in search of him. By now it was 3 o'clock. They had stopped at the hotel, picked up their luggage, and arrived at the Tankadere just as the last of the boat's supplies were being stored. The Tankadere was a little boat with 2 tall masts. Its deck was as white as ivory, and all its brass fittings were polished to a shine. The boat was as graceful as a racing yacht, and it was obvious the captain took pride in it. Mr. Fogg and Aouda found Fix already on board. Below deck was a square cabin with cots set in the walls. In the center was a table with a swinging lamp above. The accommodations were small but neat.
"I'm sorry to have nothing better to offer you,"
said Mr. Fogg to Fix, who bowed without responding. The detective felt humiliated for relying on the kindness of Mr. Fogg.
"He may be a rascal,"
thought Fix,
"but he is a polite one."
The sails were raised at 10 minutes past 3. Mr. Fogg and Aouda, who were seated on the deck, cast a last glance at the quay in the hopes of seeing Passepartout. The Frenchman, however, did not appear. It was risky to attempt to reach Shanghai in that season of the year. The Chinese seas were dangerous and terrible storms threatened during November. But John Bunsby believed in the Tankadere, which, in his words, rode the waves like a seagull. Late in the day, Fogg and the others sailed out through the channels of Hong Kong. The Tankadere, encouraged by favorable winds, conducted itself admirably. John Bunsby had high hopes for the journey and assured Mr. Fogg that they would reach Shanghai in time. When they got into open sea, Phileas Fogg said,
"Captain, I'm sure that I do not need to ask you to use all possible speed."
Trust me, Your Honor. We have raised all the sails the wind will allow,
said the captain. Phileas Fogg, with body straight and legs apart, stood like a sailor at the bow of the boat. He gazed at the swelling waters without staggering. Aouda, who sat further back, looked out upon the ocean. The boat, carried forward by the wind, seemed to be flying over the waves. Fix, seated below, kept apart from his fellow travelers. He did not like to talk to the man whose favors he had been forced to accept.
"Once in the United States, what should I do?"
he asked himself.
"Should I abandon my man? No, 100 times no. I will not lose sight of him for an hour."
Mr. Fogg and Aouda ate with good appetites that evening. Fix was invited to share their meal, which he accepted reluctantly. To travel at this man's expense and live upon his provisions was distasteful to him. Still, he was obliged to eat, so he ate. When the meal was over, he took Mr. Fogg aside and said,
"Sir, you have been very kind to pay my way on this boat, but I must ask to pay my share." "Let us not speak of that, sir,"
replied Mr. Fogg. Fix was determined.
"But I insist." "No, sir,"
repeated Mr. Fogg.
"I consider it part of my general expenses."
Fix bowed, returned to his cot, and did not speak again that evening. At daybreak the next morning, the wind began to blow harder. The sun had set in a red mist the night before. John Bunsby had studied ocean weather long enough to know what it meant.
We are going to have a rough wind,
the captain said to Mr. Fogg.
"Is the wind north or south?"
asked Mr. Fogg.
South. Look, a typhoon is coming up,
said the captain.
"I am glad it's a typhoon from the south, as it will carry us forward,"
said Mr. Fogg. The captain took precautions and tied up all the sails. The top masts were put away and all hands went forward. A single triangular sail of strong canvas was hoisted at the bow to keep the boat from turning into the wind. Then they waited. John Bunsby had requested that all passengers go below, but Mr. Fogg, Aouda, and Fix chose to remain on deck. None of them wanted to feel imprisoned in a narrow space with very little air while the boat bounced about. The storm and rain started around 8 o'clock. The Tankadere was lifted like a feather by a violent wind. The boat flew northward, carried by monstrous waves. The Tankadere was almost submerged numerous times by mountains of water that rose behind it, but the skill of the captain saved the boat. The passengers were often bathed in a cold spray that was whipped by the wind. Fix cursed it. Aouda kept her eyes fastened on her protector, whose coolness amazed her. As for Mr. Fogg, he acted as if the typhoon was just part of his plan. The Tankadere kept steady on its northward track. The night was a terror, and it was a miracle that the boat did not sink. Twice the boat would have gone down if the crew had not been constantly on the watch. Aouda was exhausted, and more than once, Mr. Fogg rushed to protect her from the violence of the waves. Day reappeared, and the tempest raged just as fiercely. By noon, there were signs that the wind was calming, and the night was comparatively quiet. Some of the sails were raised, and the Tankadere moved forward with speed again. The next morning at dawn, the passengers could see the coast of Shanghai. The wind and waves had grown much calmer. At 7, they were still 3 miles from Shanghai when a long black smokestack, crowned with a plume of white smoke, appeared on the waters near the coast.
Blast our luck,
Cried John Bunsby.
the Yokohama steamer has left the port.
What will happen next? Are they going to find Passepartout? Don't forget to be with us next time. The last episode in the first semester. I hope you enjoy. Thank you for watching and see you next video.